Good morning, everyone. As agreed at the Assembly's annual meeting on the 14th of May 2021, the Confirmations Hearings Committee is allowed to appoint a chair on a meeting-by-meeting basis for the 2021-22 Assembly year. For the first item of business, I will conduct an election for the chair for this meeting in accordance with the GLA's standing orders. In the event of one candidate being nominated, I will declare the nominated candidate chair of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for this meeting. A proposer and a seconder is required for each nomination. In the event of two candidates being nominated, I will ask for votes in favour of each candidate. Are there any nominations?
Nominate A.M. Fortune, please.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to second that nomination?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Then I declare that Assembly Member Fortune is elected Chairman of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for today.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Confirmation Hearings Committee. Can I also welcome Assembly Member Bakari, who is attending this meeting as an observer. Under Standing Order 8.2, and will be participating in the discussion at Agenda Item 5. Can I please ask that any electronic devices are switched to silent mode? He said checking his own. And can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received for today's meeting?
Chairman, apologies have been received from Assembly Member Hall, for whom Assembly Member Devenish is substituting, and Assembly Member Moema, for whom Assembly Member Harani is substituting.
Thank you. So taking us to Agenda Item 3, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note, are there any declarations of interest that need to be declared? And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at Agenda Item 3 and just double check there are no other disclosable pecuniary interests? Can I also invite Liz Pearce to declare any interests relevant to the business of this meeting or in relation to the proposed appointment?
It's Peace, not Pierce. But other than that, don't worry, it's a common mistake.
Obvious interest noted.
I have no interests to declare, other than what is in my conflict of interest register.
Thank you, that's noted. Okay, Agenda Item 4, which is the minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 24th of August 2021 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Confirmed.
Marvellous, which takes us to Agenda Item 5, which is the meat of the meeting. Can I welcome Liz Pearce, CBE, to the meeting? Thanks for coming along this morning. The committee will be putting questions to you in relation to your proposed reappointment to the Office of Chair of the OPDC. However, can I first ask members to A, note the background information circulated within the agenda for the meeting. I take that as noted. And note the supplementary information which was received after publication of the agenda, and that's Liz's CV and supporting statement, and a summary of the role and key issues and priorities for the OPDC. Noted. Thank you. So we'll now move on to the question and answer session, Liz, and I will start with a big open question for you to get the meeting off to a start, which is, what have you personally brought to the role of chair of the OPDC over the past 4 years?
Well, I like to think that I've actually kept this project going. It's been a very challenging project. When I came on board, OPDC was formed back in 2015. I didn't join until, whether it's 17, 18. And it hit some sort of very rocky patches. I was able to use my abilities to actually pull people together, both internally in the executive, to actually liaise with people in City Hall, to liaise with people across government. And that's very important. I'm sure we'll come on to all that, what it is with the asks we need from central government. And because I've got a background in both the public and the private sector, I like to think I know how to talk to central government. So I think that's been exceedingly helpful. I was able to keep the board together. Again, you know, in those sort of situations when you're going through difficult times, it's very easy for people to get disillusioned and leave. So pulling the project together, I think or holding it together was really, really important. I think over the last couple of years, it's been about looking to the future. It's been about looking at what we were able to put together in the aftermath of the problems with our local plan and with certain landowners in the area, and actually come up with an alternative plan. One of the things I did do was manage finally to resolve the issue of appointing a good permanent chief executive. We had quite a long period with interim arrangements because of the departure of the chief executive who was in post when I first joined. It was quite difficult to go out and find the right sort of person for this role, given all the uncertainties that existed. People were not going to give up an extremely secure, well-paid job somewhere to come into something that looked extremely difficult and challenging. And I consider it one of my great successes, and we won't go into the details of how I did it, that I persuaded David Luntz that he would, first of all, come as our interim. I could say that was part of a dastardly long-term plot to move from him just being an interim to a permanent appointment, but I think he managed to see what an exciting and interesting project this was going to be. He'd done his time at City Hall, and he agreed that he would move full-time into the role. Having David then leading the executive team has proved a great benefit to the organisation. So David, with the executive team, with the support of the board, under my leadership, have been able to put together what I think is a potentially very exciting plan for moving the organisation forward. It's not without risks. I'm sure you're going to ask me all about those in due course, but we have a plan, which I think is the really important thing.
Thank you. I mean, I have to confess, I'm relatively new to the Assembly, so it's only very recently I've learned more about the OPDC and had a look at their history, and there have been challenges. What leapt out to me there in your response is where you talked about holding it together, and I can see how that may be the case looking at some of the history. It's worth pointing out to anybody that's observing that we have a plenary session coming up very soon where we're going to get more into some of those challenges, and that this is a confirmation hearing. But what may help is, could you set out some of those main challenges that you faced and what you've done to overcome them?
Are you talking now about sort of past challenges, or can we move on to sort of looking forward?
Past from 2017, from your appointment.
From my appointment onwards. Well, I think when we started off, we thought we had a perfectly credible way of proceeding. I mean, part of the problem with a project like this is the sheer size. And I was always very much of the opinion that we had to sort of take it in bite-sized chunks. You know, the business handbook term is, you know, you don't eat the elephant whole, you actually do it piece by piece. We thought by focusing on Old Oak North, which was a strategy which the GLA and the Mayor had approved, we could actually do that as our sort of first significant chunk of big development. We thought we had a willing landowner to play with, to partner with. That all turned out not to be the case. And that part of the project, well, once we came to our local plan, the landowner by that time was not in agreement with what we were trying to do. He lobbied hard. The planning inspector looked at the two sets of viability data, ours and this landowner's, and decided he believed the landowners, and that therefore he wouldn't confirm the local plan we had put forward. That's a pretty serious thing for something like OPDC and a big development project. I've discussed this on many occasions with the Budget and Performance Committee and the full Assembly, and with Miss Hall in particular. And you know, you learn lots of lessons from something like that. And that was the point, I think, at which we were all a bit downcast as to what exactly might happen to OPDC. I should perhaps also flag up that, you know, one of the problems with this as a big regeneration project is that we, the agency nominated to drive the regeneration, have no land. Now, you know, if you look at something like LLDC, or you look at the big private sector regeneration projects in London, you know, there is a controlling interest that drives, owns, has a lien on the land. And it was very interesting that even senior people in government recognised this, and the one of the then Director Generals at Department for Transport, I think it was, absolutely saw this as a real weakness in the whole sort of regeneration programme for that area. And he helped broker this MOU between the then Mayor and the Department for Transport, which would give us access to the Network Rail land at existing use value. That's still extant, and we still hope to be able to sort of crystallise that as our new plans move forward. But I think it was partly because we had no land of our own that we were very keen to work with the biggest landowner in the area we'd designated Old Oak North, who seemed to want to do what we wanted to do. So, we thought we had a confluence of interests, turned out we didn't. So that's what led to the rejection of part of our plans, not all of them, in the local plan hearings under the planning inspector. That's why we had to look for a new alternative. The new plan is very much focused around using government, public sector land. A lot of it is in the ownership of HS2, Network Rail, small elements of other public sector ownership, and a much smaller portion in private sector ownership. So our big challenge as we move forward is to look at how we can get those public sector agencies to work with us so that we can, I think to say get control of the land sounds too sort of acquisitive, but we can actually exercise the role we need to exercise as a guiding and controlling interest in looking at how this area should be developed. Quite a lot of this land is HS2 work sites at the moment, and if you've walked around the site recently, you'll see it's a real sort of genuine brownfield. Well, I guess it's a quagmire by now, but anyway, it's very much sort of brownfield construction sites, which probably 5 years ago we weren't really focusing on sufficiently because it all looked as if it was so far in the future. But 5 years on, 4 or 5 years on, the completion of HS2 is beginning to look a lot more relevant, and once we can get our hands on some of those construction sites, then we've really got something to work with. That's what our plan is predicated around.
I'm mindful that I don't want to step on some of the questions that other members may have, but I certainly recognised it when I was researching that the challenge of not having any sort of money or land or permission is quite a rather big challenge for a development vehicle.
Yes.
What would be useful is also, when you're giving some more examples later, talk about some of the things that you've done personally to overcome some of those challenges. But I saw Hina, you wanted to come in there.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just an observer, but I want to learn more. I am new to this role, and I'm new to what the OPDC actually does, and I'd like to just have a very clear understanding of the purpose and how, as chair, you're going to make that purpose of the OPDC successful, and your clear KPIs as a chair. What does that entail? I just want to get a really clear understanding as the meeting goes ahead.
Well, I mean, OPDC was set up by the previous mayor to take advantage of the fact that there was going to be a massive piece of public infrastructure built at this place called Old Oak. So it's where HS2 comes into London and where actually it's going to stop for quite a few years until Euston gets sorted out, and it's where HS2 meets Crossrail. And the government are going to be spending somewhere in the order of £1.7 billion on this brand new station. I think it's going to be one of the biggest station interchanges in the country, if not Western Europe. It's going to be a huge enterprise. Now, that brings with it opportunities. And surrounding this area where the new station is going to be was a lot of brownfield industrial land, some residential, and never forget that we must never forget that there are people there who live there, for whom this is, not always the best possible set of events. But this was a great opportunity which the then mayor seized in terms of creating a new district of London around this transport interchange. The previous mayor, Mr Johnson, obviously moved on. The new mayor came in. He re-looked at the project. He decided, having conducted an internal review, that yes, this was indeed something that he really wanted to drive hard. So he confirmed, I should have said what the previous mayor had done, which was to set up a mayoral development corporation. Part of the challenge of this site, apart from loads of brownfield land, is that it is actually 3 boroughs coming together. If you look at the boundary map, the 3 corners of the boroughs all sort of come together in Old Oak and Park Royal.
So what's your main aim?
Yeah, the main aim is to create a new district of London
And
around
as chair,
the station.
what are your KPIs to achieve that aim?
My KPIs are delivery of homes and jobs.
Brilliant. That's very clear then. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Liz. When we started 4 to 5 years ago talking about this, we used to always call it the biggest regeneration project in Western Europe, and we talked a lot about the vision and the ambition. Do you think that's sort of, with all the issues, don't go into specific issues, but you think that's sort of waned, and how can we get that vision back, particularly as today obviously we're starting at COP26, I mentioned it before Leonie does, and therefore this would be a showcase opportunity for a zero carbon green new town?
Yes, I agree with all of that. I think we have been. No, I don't think deflected is the right word. I think the vision thing has possibly sort of sunk a little bit in priorities because we've been so concerned with actually getting together a local plan that we can get through the inspector, getting together the land, getting the right sort of resources. But I can assure you there is no shortage of vision in terms of the area we want to create. And once we've got some of those different things in place, and you will appreciate that some of our discussions with government departments and the like are at a delicate stage of negotiation, so we don't want it to make it look as if we're sort of forcing people's hands at the moment. This is a delicate situation, but we absolutely have the vision, and we haven't lost any of the enthusiasm for creating a genuine sort of low carbon, low private transport new district of London that is genuinely sustainable and genuinely a good place for people to live.
Thank you. I won't go into the essence of the main issue now, because I think really you should do that at the plenary. But you touched on it a second ago and we talked about control. You and I will know from our property backgrounds, if you can't control a site, what can you do with it? So I'd love to hear your answer at the plenary in terms of how you are going to get control of the site. I think that is key. Moving on to the question that I was asked to ask you, and I'll put it slightly more diplomatically than my colleagues who wrote this question, but you are known in the property industry by all of us as the sort of super Ned, and often when there's a problem you become the Med, and you have got I'm very impressed with this list actually. You've got a whole load of appointments already, from Howard the Walden Estate. I should declare an interest as a Westminster City Councillor on that. RPS Group, RDI Real Estate Investment, Holby Turner, also I know them very well, the Churches Conservation Trust, etc., etc. I guess what I'm really asking you in the politest way is, you're very busy in Super Ned. Have you got the time to fulfil the OPDC role with all these other roles?
I believe I have, or else I wouldn't be sitting here. One or two of those you mentioned I don't do anymore. As you know, NED portfolios change with remarkable frequency. Private equity swoops in and buys up a company of which you thought you were a non-executive director, RDI REIT. In this particular case, I no longer work for Holby Turner. But yes, I do a lot of other things, but that's the nature of a portfolio existence, and that's for me to manage, and for me absolutely not to waste your time sitting here if I didn't think I could do it properly, which I do.
How much time do you think will require over the next 2.5 years to be the chair of this organisation?
I work on the basis that I spend probably a minimum of a day a week on this. It's not a single day. I don't come into we're in Brent now, I don't go into the offices in Brent and sit there for a day. For instance, I spent quite a lot of yesterday prepping for this meeting. I would spend bits of a weekend, reading board papers. Other times I will be meeting people in other contexts in which it is also useful to raise OPDC type issues. Some weeks I spend more time. I spent a whole day last week with the team at an away day when we looked at it was a bit of sort of confidence building in the light of the sort of post-pandemic oddities of hybrid working and this sort of thing. So I like to think I'm absolutely available. I am a non-executive chairman, however, and I'm very conscious that when you have a very competent chief executive, what they don't want is a chairman interfering and trying to do their job for them. So I think getting the balance right is really important, and being there when you're needed. I like to look at I consider part of my role, apart from strategy and running the board, which is what a non-executive chairman should do, I like to feel I'm good at sort of helping the relationships with broader government. We spent some time with the the chairman of Homes England down on site a few weeks ago. That is somebody I had known through my time in the property industry, so it's useful to use those links to the benefit of OPDC.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Horani.
Chair. So what have you done as Chair to raise the profile of OPDC, and what might you do differently going forward?
Well, we have done I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. A whole lot of different stakeholders with whom you need to raise the profile. Obviously, there's the sort of the community around OPDC, and I think that's hugely important because when something like a mayoral development corporation comes along, a lot of people think you're going to do a lot of things that they won't like. So actually having a community engagement plan into which we have put a huge amount of effort, and I believe our contacts with the local community are extensive and on the whole very good. There are some people who don't like what we're doing, but I'm afraid, as you probably all find here, you'll never please everybody all the time. But certainly making sure that people understand what we're doing things like our contribution at Park Royal to the London Design Festival. We've helped Park Royal be designated as a London Design District. I like to think that wouldn't have happened without putting some real oomph behind it. So that's the community and locally. Then I think more broadly, we've spent a lot of time talking up OPDC with central government. We've got a challenge with central government at the moment. There is a substantial sort of antipathy to things London and the assumption that everything in London is fine and it doesn't need central government support or money or anything else. And we've been working very hard with people in government, both at official and we're sort of moving on to chairman and ministerial level to make sure they understand the opportunities that there are here at OPDC, and the fact that if we don't really do what we're now trying to do, it will be a massive lost opportunity. So that's community, central government, then of course the wider development community. That one in some ways is easier because the wider development community, the property industry, are always keeping an eye out for opportunities, and in some ways it's a case of sort of holding them back actually. Hang on, we don't want you to come rushing in with plans for lots of large sheds on this site. Thank you very much. Let's wait until we can get something a little better and a little more granular. So I don't think there's any shortage of knowledge as to what we're doing. I think a number of people, if I was being absolutely frank, have said they felt over the last few years we had lost our way. I think we have a way now. And I think as we try and resolve the issues we're going to talk about, the land, the local plan, the land, the money, finding a development partner, I think the whole world's going to know about Old Oak. I should say, sorry, I call it Old Oak. I should say Old Oak and Park Royal, because let's not forget we also cover Park Royal, and I am deeply interested in doing everything we can to help Park Royal grow as an industrial district of London. I mean, it's hugely important to London's economy, and the businesses there are hugely important. And frankly, I think Park Royal is hugely important to what we do on the Old Oak half of it as well, because I don't want this to just end up as a place where people live. I want there to be jobs there as well. Really important to have a proper integrated community.
And you touched on discussions with government as well. So what have you done as chair to make the case for additional public funding for the OPDC?
Well, we spent a lot of time a couple of years ago promoting a bid for the Housing and Infrastructure Fund, HIF, and we did actually ultimately persuade the government to give us 250 million. I've spent a lot of time talking behind the scenes with friends in the IPA and Treasury to try and sort of drive a decision on that, and we actually got one. Now, we had to effectively give it back or say we weren't going to use it because of the problems over our local plan. So we're now refocusing our ask in terms of looking at the area. It's an area I call the Western Lands. It's the new focus for our development. It's a 75-acre site comprising this primarily HS2 Network Rail and some private land. And we are now working with officials at the moment, and I would hope in due course that we can get to ministers. We're working up a case with officials for how government might support that plan.
Thank you. We're back to Assembly Member Devenish.
I'm going to ask you the worst question now, Liz. I have to ask this. How often do you meet with Mr. Khan himself, and how much time have you spent with him over the last 4 years?
Goodness. Well, I've met him quite a few times over Zoom. As it happens, we had an extremely good face-to-face meeting with the Mayor, must be 3 or 4 weeks ago. We took our new plans to him. I should say I meet on I think it's monthly, if not slightly more frequently, with his Chief of Staff. And a whole range of GLA officials, and I know the Chief of Staff reports regularly to the Mayor what's going on. But I said we had to have a face-to-face meeting. I wanted to take him through what we were planning to do personally, and we did. And it was probably the best meeting I'd had with the Mayor. I had some quite frosty ones earlier on when our plans for Old Oak North fell apart, and we had to go and explain to him why we were not getting we were not going to get the local plan through, and he was very concerned. He was very reasonable about it, but he was clearly cross. This time round, he was totally in support of what we're trying to do, and actually went even further than I thought he was going to, in terms of saying he thought it was essential that the GLA should put some funding into what we were proposing to do to help our case to central government.
And you're basically the middleman between my government and their mayor. How are you going to get them to reach a conclusion? You can answer that in more detail at the plenary.
I don't know yet, Tony. That's work in progress. I mean, both sides have got to show a willingness to talk to each other. As my mother used to say, you can't take a horse to drinking water and make it drink. So I am very hopeful that central government will absolutely see the need to maximise the potential benefits from the investment they are making in this very, very large station. And I believe the Mayor absolutely understands what we need to say to central government from the GLA perspective to get them to see that we're doing our damnedest and our best. I am apolitical. I have been a civil servant for a lot of my life. I work with anybody and everybody who will help me achieve the objectives that I've been set. And I hope I can use that to the benefit of OPDC. But it's not going to be hugely easy because, of course, there's not a lot of money around at the moment.
I was going to ask you that. I'll put that on record for the plenary again rather than
ask you for it. It's going to be a busy plenary, Tony.
It's going to be a very busy. Well, I can. Some of my colleagues were very keen to be there as well. 2026, we're talking about the London market before it comes back to where it needs to be. I know it's a long-term project, but it'd be interesting to have your view, your take of the long-term view of the London market, but you don't need to answer that now. The one I've been asked to ask you now, so I'll ask my question, is to what extent have you improved stakeholder management within the OPDC, not just the Mayor and government, but everybody else? And perhaps you could also include in your answer, are you involved in the Kerslake review, which for those that don't know is to do with getting all the bits of the GLA to work together even better to produce even more housing principally?
Well, I'm not involved in, but I'm meeting Bob in, I think next week, in fact, David and I are meeting him together to talk about what he's actually trying to do. I also sit on the Mayor's Homes for Londoners board, so I'm very aware of how Old Oak and the housing contribution it will be making fits into the overall GLA objectives on housing. So I think we're pretty well, and given David Lunt's background as well as the Executive Director for Housing and Land, I think we're very well plugged into what what the GLA is trying to do. I think, but by other stakeholders, you were thinking of what, the development communities.
Everybody. The three boroughs,
the three
real
boroughs.
Local people, the general public. Yes. The development industry and other stakeholders,
well,
the boroughs.
We spend a lot of time talking to all of those, and I see my role as chair as to be very much outward facing and have contact with people. I said earlier, and I will be quite frank about this, there are people in the local area who don't like what we're doing. They don't like what HS2 is doing, and I have actually spent quite a lot of time with HS2 and with Mark Thurston in particular, to make sure that HS2 really look after the local people who are impacted by the development. It can't be much fun having that amount of heavy traffic thundering at the sort of bottom of your back garden. And the amount of dust and the traffic, you know, it's not an easy place at the moment. I have deep sympathy with the local community. I think a lot of them sort of tend to conflate HS2 and us, so we get a bit of stick for all this. But I really, really have spent time, I mean a lot of time, with HS2, persuading them to do some of their sort of community engagement differently and talk more to the local community. I think we've done a hugely good job in raising our profile with the local community, and you look at the sort of people who turned up to our events in Park Royal the other week as part of the London Design Festival. You know, that wasn't just sort of boards and top brass coming up and, you know, sort of having a glass of wine. That was lots of real people coming along and looking at what we're doing and talking to us. We work very closely with the 3 local boroughs. The leaders sit on my board. We're sort of slightly moving our focus now. We have more focus on Brent and Ealing because of where this new development area is. We have had a degree of concern expressed from Hammersmith and Fulham about our plans down the Scrubs Lane side of our development, and we have been trying to work through those concerns with Hammersmith and Fulham. So I think our relations with the boroughs are extremely good. Councillor Butt, the leader of Brent, is always very quick to remind me, in case I might forget, of the importance of actually getting the linkages between Harleston and what we're doing around Willesden Junction and south of Willesden Junction. And I absolutely agree with him. You know, and if I ever appear to be neglecting that, he's quite right to remind me, but I'm not really, because I think Willesden Junction is absolutely key to making lots of good local connections between existing communities and potentially new communities. And then I could give you a whole host of things that we are doing to involve, you know, the broader public, Londoners. I mean, for example, we maintain that with our last consultation on our local plan modifications, and this is using GLA measures of social media impact, that we reached somewhere in the order of 900,000 different people. So people who logged on, who looked at, who clicked on, clicked through, looked at our social media. So, I mean, in some ways, I think this concentration on social media has helped us reach a greater number of people. But we don't neglect face-to-face, and when we can, you know, we do a lot of local face-to-face work.
Thank you. A couple of very brief questions. I'm hogging the meeting and I shouldn't. And really you can answer these again at the plenary rather now. What are you doing in terms of private capital versus the Mayor's contribution and government? Just a rough footprint in terms of the percentages would be useful at the plenary. And as you're aware, the GLA, all elements of the GLA are now meant to be building a third of all their housing through modern methods of construction. Are you signed up to that? And if so, how are you going to do that? But you can answer that again at the plenary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Devenish. And if you're writing all these down, the plenary should be quite a doddle.
I'm hoping there's a recording of this somewhere, or somebody's scribbling it all down.
I saw Assemblymember Bakari is keen to come in. I know that Assemblymember Berry is.
Thank you. I shall need it.
So Assemblymember Bakari, do come in.
Yeah,
but be mindful of some of the issues that other members do want to ask about later.
Just to kind of link onto the stakeholder question, can I just ask specifically about Pacific people? When was the last time you met Andrew Haynes and Sir Peter Hendy from Network Rail? And when did you last meet Benedette Kelly, the Permanent Secretary of Department for Transport?
I have to say, all three of those, it was pre-pandemic. We were actually due last summer to take Peter Hendy round. We were doing a virtual tour, and the IT completely screwed up, and we didn't, so we ended up.
So your plan is to meet them as soon as possible?
I mean, yes, where it's useful for me to meet chairman, I will do it. Quite often, the real work gets done official to official. I mean, I'm an ex-official, I'm an ex-Whitehall official, and you know, I like to think I actually know how policy gets made and written down. I would say a lot of people tend to think it's done at minister to minister or chair to chair level. The groundwork has to be done at official level, because unless those senior people get the right briefs, then you don't get the right conversation. And I think what our team is really good at doing is making sure they are working with their equivalents in DFT, which we are, in DLUC, which we absolutely are, and they have been hugely helpful to us, and with Homes England also, which we are. Where I think we will need to forge some really important links is with the Treasury. We have a very strong supporter in the shape of a senior official from IPA who attends our boards as an observer, and the IPA is important in briefing the Treasury, shall we say. But ultimately, I think we need to get a bit more traction with Treasury officials.
You mentioned that some people have thought you'd lost your way. I just wanted to pick up on that. And you mentioned local organisations, specifically. There have been groups like St Quintin and Woodlands Neighbourhood Forum, but their area wasn't necessarily HS2. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about the level of transparency. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how you've been engaging with those particular groups?
Absolutely. It's not in our area. It is a neighbourhood forum which is adjacent to our area, so it has perfectly legitimate concerns to express. I think it is run by, I think its chair, who is also the advisor to the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum, is an ex-planning official and therefore extremely hot on planning law, probity and everything else. I think it would be fair to say, well, we haven't recently, but at one stage we were getting, a sort of 15-page letter every couple of weeks querying what we were doing, which we absolutely did our best to answer. We actually invited this gentleman in to talk to us. I've met him at conference. I mean, I know him perfectly well. I suppose at one point, I did actually say to him, for goodness sake, we just can't even keep up with answering your letters. And while we're busy answering your letters, we're not doing other things. He raised some good points. We have dealt with them. He's very hot on transparency. He kicked us because we hadn't at that point got all our members' interests up on the GLA website, which we dealt with. We clearly should have done. That was a mistake. I accept some of his criticism. I don't accept all of it. And as I think I mentioned earlier, you will never please everybody all the time, as I'm sure you as Assembly members know.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask about neighbourhood forums, but I don't need to now. Thank you. I did want to pick up on the question of liaison with HS2, though, and I'm a councillor in the London Borough of Camden, which is obviously in my register of interest. There, I'm in a minority group, but the whole council is really concerned about HS2's liaison and support and things that are happening in Camden, and we're trying to make a plan for rehabilitating the area that they've been working on around Euston. So I just wondered if have you talked to Camden Council at all about, because I mean your job is to essentially, your role is to network, to make these links, to come up with ways of dealing with people who are potentially difficult like HS2. Have you talked to them and worked with them at all?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question specifically, and therefore I might mislead you. I would be very surprised if at our official level, our executive, they haven't been in touch with Camden. We have certainly watched very closely what HS2 have done with regard to sort of consultative arrangements and community involvement arrangements elsewhere. And always been very quick to say to Mark Thurston, hey, you're doing this in Birmingham or wherever, why can't we have something similar here?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is find some best practice and grab
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
And dare I say it, I've rather felt that Camden perhaps is a little more vociferous and has a few more residents that have, put their oomph behind demanding certain things so we have tried very hard to represent the interests of the local people, and it's a relatively small number compared with Camden, but my goodness, it has a big impact on them, and I am very conscious of that. So I like to think we've been influential in getting HS2 to put in place better community liaison. It is more responsive. There is a dedicated resource. They've done a lot since they got their main contractors on board, BBVS, I think it's BBVS, sorry, forgive me, I may have got the string of initials wrong, who are also very seized of the need to work closely with local people when you've got a massive, great construction site. HS2 are constructing a sort of hub that's going to have a viewing area and more facilities where we can bring visitors in and actually see what they're doing, and the visitors can actually eyeball the HS2 folk, and I have a feeling we may have even I know we've suggested our board should go down there as a board and actually experience this, and I'm sure it's something we would be very happy to take assembly members who are interested as well.
The Transport Committee are doing that.
But you might be doing it anyway.
Is that us or the Transport Committee?
Not sure. Is there anybody here who's on the
There
Transport
certainly is an
Committee?
assembly visit
Yeah.
being arranged.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, I think I would always like HS2 to do more. It's a tough negotiation with Mark to get him to do more. You know, I want him to spend his money on certain things. He wants to spend his money on others. We come to an amicable conclusion, but that won't stop me pressing him always to do more.
Okay, thank you. Again, the local plan process has come up a number of times. It is one of your principal challenges. So just to sort of get to the end of that question, when are you going to have got that revised local plan through? I believe the target was this autumn. You've got about 1 month in civil service terms until that expires.
Well, funny you should mention that. We have been in obviously close touch with the planning inspector. It's the same planning inspector who conducted the hearings. He has received our modifications. He has asked no supplementary questions on the modifications, which is good from our perspective. He has to decide whether to hold a further hearing on our modifications. We are waiting to hear whether he intends to hold a further hearing. He will consult all those people who have consulted him to see whether they who've responded to his request for views. He will then decide in the light of whether there are any or how many want a public hearing, whether to have one. If he doesn't have one, then I would hope we will get a decision very quickly, like within the next month or so. If he chooses to have one, I guess that will push it back into the new year. But so far, we've had very sort of good vibes from the planning inspector that he has been satisfied with what we have done.
And that means that following the consultation that closed this summer, you've not made any further changes to the document. You've submitted it as it was.
In the light of the consultations, we've tweaked various things, obviously, because we listened very hard to the consultation, and our team did a fantastic job. And the paper we took at both the planning committee and subsequently at the board went into minute detail on all the various points that were raised and what we proposed to do about them. But yes, it is essentially the plan as modified.
I don't think there are any new versions of the plan or any subsequent modifications on the website.
In that case, it'll be what's on our website that we consulted on.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is about housing delivery and the housing strategy. Again, that comes up a lot, but just wanted to ask specifically where you're at in terms of delivering on housing. I know that the annual target's been cut from slightly above 1,000 to slightly below 1,000 a year in the new local plan. How are you actually performing in terms of delivering housing in your role as a development corporation, but also as a planning authority?
Well, clearly the heart of our housing delivery will be this new area that I like to call the Western Lands, which is this 75 acres. It's basically to the south of Willesden Junction and the north of so sandwiched between Willesden Junction and the HS2 station. So that will be our principal delivery, but not for a few years yet. But as you rightly say, we are the planning authority. We have been working with developers to pick off sites as they have come along. We have so far consented 6,000 homes since we started. Now, that includes a very big site over on the far side of Park Royal. It also includes a number of consented sites now on Scrubs Lane. There have also been a substantial number of consented sites under the delegation we gave to Ealing for the North Acton area. We have, and of course we also had within that a site you may have seen, which is what we call Oakland South, which is opposite the Collective on Old Oak Lane, which is a very substantial site. Sort of overlooks the Crossrail depot. It's a great view of trains if you're interested in trains. So what we've done, what we've tried to do is, keep the housing provision moving, and not just sit still while we go for the greater prize. And I think the planning team have done exceedingly well in getting these moving, bringing them forward, having tough negotiations with the developers over the amount of affordable housing, and showing that we are delivering homes even in advance of the main part of our project.
Okay, you can give me any numbers there. Presumably you can bring those with you. To
Yeah,
the
I mean,
plenary.
I haven't brought the detailed breakdown with me. I always come clutching them every time we do a full assembly hearing, and I didn't bring them today.
Excellent.
I mean,
we'll be asking you about that then.
And I should stress that we, and indeed both our planning committee and our board, hold the executive fully to account on the need to deliver affordable housing, and within that, social housing.
Excellent. Okay, so the other thing that's going on in terms of housing here is the funding that the GLA gives to housing.
Yes.
And we've met with Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, recently, and found that of the new money that came from the government in grants, you've given out an awful lot of it already. And this is money that runs for starts from 2021 to 26. So have you been talking with Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, about ways in which you might be able to facilitate getting grants to developers and people delivering within your area? And do you know how much has already been pushed into there? I know that these new grants are more flexible. They change the picture as far as viability goes when you're delivering affordable housing. And that's something which I think, again, in your role as chair, you can help liaise between the people who might not be aware that there's more flexibility now, or all of those things.
It's an interesting point, because of course it's not just affordable housing grant, which that's not the only way of unlocking development. And certainly one of our developers for a development, I think it's actually in the Acton, I'm just picturing it, it's sort of near North Acton, actually got loan finance from the GLA. So, I mean, this was exactly one of the things we wanted to talk to Sadiq about, and he was extremely keen that the GLA should use some of its affordable housing grant to contribute towards our wider plans, not just the ones that are already happening. And I was very gratified that he sort of turned to his officials at the meeting and said, this is something we've got to take seriously. But there's also the land fund, which would be helpful to us. Because even if we acquire Network Rail land, we've still got to pay for it. Or we've got to have some sort of agreement with Network Rail that defers the payment up front, and then we share out the proceeds once it's been developed. But actually, money from the land fund might be very helpful in actually removing the need for us to get central government grant. Because if you can actually get the cost of the land in, get somebody else to fund the land up front, then you can do your development, then the developer can sell it, you'll have an overage agreement, you get the money back at a later stage. It always strikes me as a much more efficient way of doing it than just doling out grant.
Okay, that's good. My concern in my original question, though, was that
has the GLA got enough money?
The
You'll
GLA
have to ask them that, because, as I say, the Mayor was extremely helpful in his response to us, and I took that at face value. The team are in continual discussion with the Housing and Land team. David Lunt's previous experience helps him very much in that area. He knows exactly how they work and who to talk to. So, we are in close touch with them on that. And I would be deeply disappointed if we didn't get some financial support from the GLA.
Okay, I think we'll come back to you again later for more detailed account.
I mean, we won't be able to give you an actual number because we haven't got an actual proposal yet, because clearly all we can say is if the development happens at this speed, in this way, with these numbers, looking at our overall financing, this is what we think we would need from affordable housing grant to make up any difference. So, that would be how we actually put this case together.
Yeah, so I think you're saying you haven't secured any affordable housing grant. Yeah,
well, affordable housing grant will already have gone into some of the projects that have happened on our site. Some of those 6,000 consented homes, as indeed will contributions from Section 106, SIL, and other things. As part of the normal planning process.
So my concern, as I expressed earlier, is that the new affordable housing grants from 21 to 26 may be used up before you get to that
and
point, and we will
I hear
come back
that,
to that
and
later, I think.
I will ask the team for a specific brief on that, having talked to Tom Copley, but I can't tell you at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's an element there of, well, you tell us. So with the plenary next week, maybe this is something we'll
think
note
we'll
down.
pick up
I
on
think we're
that
going to have to put an extra hour on the plenary. I think we're going to need a bit of vote by the sounds of it. But that's something, if we could record that, so that maybe we can push that information next week. Assembly Member Bakari, did you want to come back on the local plan quickly, or has that been covered? Fantastic. Thank you. In that case, we shall move to Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, good morning.
Hello.
What do you think are your most top three challenges at the role of chair of the OPCD, and what is, in your experience, that help you meet those challenges?
Well, in a way, I think we've covered them already. I would say I have four challenges, which are sort of external facing. I mean, I think there are different sort of internal challenges we can talk about in terms of running a board and everything else. But the four challenges at the moment are getting the local plan through. Well, we're in somebody else's hands now. We have done everything we can conceivably think of to make that happen. We're hoping the planning inspector comes up trumps on that one. The second point is getting the land assembled. And you know, Tony said he would ask us later at the plenary session about contact with the private sector, but we have been having a lot of contact with the private sector, and it's very interesting that the one thing they all say is, really interested in this area, could be really exciting, come back and talk to us when you've got some land. It's, you know, they want to know who's going to be controlling these HS2 and Network Rail work sites. The third element is how the whole thing is financed. And I wouldn't want to put it as bluntly as saying that, you know, we'll be going to the government cap in hand for another sort of 250 million like we did last time. There may be slightly different ways of actually cutting the cloth this time round. But we will need some creative ways of filling the funding gap. There will be a funding gap because whatever you do here, you need to invest up front in quite substantial infrastructure. Not as much as when we were doing Old Oak North, which needed a whole load of bridges and tunnels and cutting through viaducts and things that were deeply, deeply expensive. We believe, actually, and if you look at the lie of the land, you can see why it's simpler. You know, that this is a simpler infrastructure ask, but it's still got to have proper infrastructure. Because if we want to make it a green district of London, you know, it's got to have proper accessibility. People have got to be able to get in and out of it easily, not just on HS2 and Crossrail. And then I think the fourth thing is, the challenge is, and this comes a little downstream, as I've explained, is actually finding the right sort of partners in the development world. And we don't know at the moment whether it's too big for one, whether we need a sort of consortium, whether we'd simply have a sort of development manager partner, or whether we might look for a partner investor, whether there might be a club of investors who would do this. And I think until we do that, we won't end up being hugely sort of granular on precisely what will get built where. I mean, we've got the local plan, you know, which sets out the overall framework, but we've sort of held back from doing anything that I would call a sort of detailed master plan, because actually if we're going to work with the development industry, they'll drive the master planning side of things, because they understand what it is they need to do to actually deliver a viable site. So those are my four big challenges. We're on all of them. You know, one would love to be able to do them all tomorrow, but you can't. These are quite long-term plays.
Well, I mean, it's very helpful you putting them all together. But one of the, of course, big challenges is that you have no land at all, the OPCD.
No, exactly.
And so how are you facilitating the transfer of public sector land over to yourselves?
Well, that is the nub of our discussions at the moment with the Department for Transport, with DLUC, and with Homes England, and with some element of input from the Treasury. I mean, as I say, the MOU still exists. It's never been crystallised. I tried very hard to actually get some sites sort of transferred to OPDC very early on in the process, and for lots of reasons, some of which I can't even remember now. It just seemed to be incredibly complicated. This was primarily Network Rail land. Some of the sites were quite small with some quite operational issues around them. And of course, Network Rail's primary responsibility is to the efficient operation of the railway, and that always has to take precedence over potential development. So, you know, I'd look at a piece of land and say, well, you're not using that. Why can't we have it now? Ah, yes, but, you know, we might need it for this, or we need access to the track for emergency repairs. You know, so it's never quite as simple as you think it is. Network Rail is still a key player in this, but I think the biggest player is HS2. And we have got to win the political argument that the HS2 land ought to be part of our overall development plan. We're not trying to do HS2 out of the development proceeds of this. They've factored those into their finances for HS2. You know, they make a contribution, albeit quite a small one, to the overall costs of HS2. We can't ignore that. They need to get their due recompense. It's about setting up a structure. We've got lots of ideas, there's been lots of discussions, meetings, people are thinking about this. We'll ultimately, or rather the department's concerned, will ultimately need to get political buy-in to this. And that's why, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, part of a chairman's role is to do whatever political liaison is necessary. You know, I think we're getting into that phase now in trying to get central government to help us in a way which would actually be quite cost effective for central government. It's less about saying give us some money, it's more about facilitate the use of assets that already sit on a department's notional balance sheet.
Because unless you have that land, the other private developers don't want to come into...
No, quite right. No, quite right.
So
the land is absolutely crucial. Which in a funny sort of way was why when we were looking at Old Oak North, it looked simpler because we had a potential partner who had the land, he owned it. But you know, that didn't work. So
I mean, you have been chair of the OPC, but do you think progress has been made, and where do you think is the bottleneck?
Well, I don't see it as a bottleneck. I see it as, at the moment, I see it now as, you know, due process. And I've worked in government for long enough to know these things don't happen overnight, nor indeed do they happen overnight in local government. So I couldn't say we have a plan and we will have a decision by then and we'll do this. We are working on it. I have no reason to think we can't find a sensible solution, and I would be mortified if we don't, because I think, as I said, this would be the most ridiculous lost opportunity for everybody. You know, for us here in London, for you know the Assembly, the GLA, but also for central government. You know, it's as much in their interests. I mean, I say very sort of jokingly to people who listen, you know, if this were not to work, or if we don't get the support we need, you know, there's going to be a huge number of people tumbling out of this wonderful sort of 1.7 billion station, and all they're going to see is an array of sheds in front of them. Well, you know, that's not actually the picture we want to paint in Old Oak and Park Royal. I like the sheds in Park Royal, but not in the Old Oak bit.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Looking ahead again, what do you think is the biggest opportunity if you are reappointed as the Chair coming up into the future?
The four challenges I've outlined are also opportunities. And the biggest opportunity is that we have something which is predominantly brownfield land, and I'm not ignoring the interests of the people who do live around it. There are people who live there, but there is an awful lot of genuine brownfield land on which we could build a fabulous new district of London. That's the great opportunity. That's the one I don't want to miss, and I don't want to see this brownfield land covered in a whole load of very big sheds, you know, for Ocado. Sorry, not that I've got anything against Ocado, but in the right place. I very much believe in community building, communities. John Prescott used to call them sustainable communities, and I used to sort of laugh a bit at the time and say, well, isn't a sustainable community just a town or a village? But I was brought up in a genuinely sustainable community where the places people worked was in walking distance of where they lived. You know, so it's that was done at the turn of last century. It's the 15-minute city idea. We could build a really, really exciting place for people to live and work. That's the opportunity.
I mean, it also sounds like a challenge, though. I mean, that's what we've also been exploring. But that's what you see as being the biggest opportunity over the forthcoming term. So if you're reappointed, reflecting on your previous term, and then looking ahead to the future with these challenges and opportunities, is there anything that you would do differently?
Oh yes. Well, I think one should always learn from what you've done. I think probably, well, I think there's a couple of things. I would like to get a lot closer to the landowners than we probably did last time. And I don't want to go into the ins and outs of what happened to the relationship with the landowners. It wasn't as good as it should be.
Let's not talk about Car Giant.
Let's not talk about. Thank you very much. I'd much rather not. And by the way, I hasten to add, Car Giant are now huge supporters of what we're trying to do, and they are an integral part of our plan moving forward, because their industrial site, we want to see a degree of industrial intensification on it, so there'll be even more jobs provided there, where the people who live in the area that we're hoping to develop, will be able to work. So Car Giant are an integral part of our plans going forward. And the business model they have, I think, is a really interesting one for a green future for London. Sian would probably say no cars at all, but I suppose if you've got to have cars,
we went to visit them. It was interesting.
Yeah, well, if you've got to have cars, they may as well be electric cars.
They repair rather
that's
than
what Jeff wants to do. I'm sorry, I do apologise. I've lost the thread of where we were going on that one.
Well, it was really about learning from the last term of being the chair. What if anything? What have you learnt?
Yeah.
And what would you do differently?
Putting it bluntly, I've perhaps learnt. I might not take without question legal advice I was given. I might challenge it a bit more. I might perhaps go out on a limb to have conversations with people that my legal advisors told me not to. But, again, that's all part of the history. I think probably the biggest thing is to not be too speedy in coming up with a master plan. A master plan has sort of connotations of fixing things. And once you fix things, people get twitchy and nervous. And I think also, quite often, if you spend a lot of time and money doing a master plan, when you do get the real thing in the shape of a developer coming along saying, well, this is what I've got to build out, they will have different views as well, because they will understand what their market wants. Now, one shouldn't compromise one's principles, but one should listen to the people who are going to do the actual delivery, because they're the ones who've got to deliver on the ground. So I think we want to keep a relatively flexible view within the context of our local plan. And I think there's another reason for doing that as well, though it's not lessons learned. We've been driven to this by COVID. I think we have to stay flexible in terms of the type of places we're going to create in the future, because while we assimilate the impacts of COVID and what it means for the world of work and the world of living, we may come to some different conclusions over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So, retaining a degree of flexibility about the actual nature of the development is, I think, going to be hugely important. But there's still got to be a pretty large amount of what I would call hardcore development to deliver the numbers that the London Plan requires of us, and that is the Mayor's London Plan, and we're a mayoral development corporation, so that's what drives us.
I mean, obviously that is one of the things that has changed over the period of time of your involvement, is that the London Plan has gone from being the London Plan intend to publish to now being the London Plan fully published. Do you think there is anything in there that would, mean that you would act differently going into the future in terms of, you're talking about flexibility in the master plan. Do you think you'd do consultation differently? Do you think you'd look at transport links differently? Do you think post-COVID the concept of the 15-minute city, do you think those are going to be things that will change the way that you operate going into the future, both as the as the chief exec, but also as the company altogether?
I think, just picking up one of those straight off, I think the way one does consultation has been continually changing. And I think, COVID, interestingly, made quite a big difference to the way people talk to each other. I mean, we have really, really bent over backwards to do extensive consultation and do it well. Were Mr. Boff here, he and I had an exchange at a previous hearing where he was suggesting that we did not talk to enough people. I think he was sort of implying I needed to consult every Londoner about what we were planning to do at Old Oak. Well, the fact that 900,000 people actually did plug in some way or other to what we were doing, it's not every Londoner, but it's an awful lot of people who were interested. But having said that, I think the way consultation's done is continually evolving. And what I'm particularly interested to do, and there are tools and software in the marketplace now that you can use, is to try and seek the wider views of those people who don't even live in this area yet. Because it's not just about the existing inhabitants, residents, it's about the people who want to come into the area and what they actually want. And I think that's really important then in the sort of post-COVID context, because, you know, how many people do want to live in high-rise 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and what can we do to make that acceptable living? I think you can look at some developments in London where they're getting it right. It's relatively dense, you know, the sort of densities we'd be looking at, but it's also more acceptable from in terms of the facilities that it provides for people and families. So yes, you know, there may be changes in the way we do community. In terms of the London plan overall, I mean, essentially that sort of reconfirms the necessity of what we're doing and the way we're doing it, and the numbers stayed the same. So, you know, our central driver is still what it is, to deliver 24,000 roughly, 24,000 homes over the lifetime of this project, which is a long project. And we've delivered 6,000 so far. And our new plans will deliver another 13,000. So, you know, we are getting there.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? There's none that I can see. So can I thank you, Liz, for attending today's meeting and for your contributions. You're now free to leave the meeting while we just conclude some of the business. But thanks again. And looks like we're going to have an interesting plenary in the next week.
Sounds like it.
At least you've got a heads up on some of the questions.
Chair, I
read the
think if
transcript
Liz wants
carefully.
to stay and listen to us talking about her, she's very welcome to do that as well. I believe we normally offer people at confirmation hearings the opportunity to hear our deliberations.
Right, okay.
You're absolutely free to stay. That's absolutely fine. Because the committee is now required to make a decision on its recommendation to the Mayor as to whether or not the nominee should be appointed as chair of the OPDC. I didn't get a sense from the meeting that there was any reluctance to do that. So I will propose a resolution, and the resolution I propose is that it be agreed to recommend that the Mayor should proceed with his appointment of Liz Pearce, CBE, to the office of Chair of OPDC. Is the group and the committee in agreement?
Agreed.
Agreed. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, you've spoilt the surprise now, Liz. So we will make sure that letter gets off to the Mayor following the committee's recommendation. So as there's no other business, that concludes today's meeting. Thank you.